In the 1940s, autism was so rare that it didn't have a name. And even in the early years of more consistent records, starting in the 2000s, the numbers of cases didn't reach even half of what we have today. In truth, part of this increase is due to greater awareness, the expansion of the diagnostic criteria, and perhaps, just perhaps, even some exaggeration in the diagnostic itself. But most experts agree that the increase is real. Something truly changed and the autism is not alone. Case of attention deficit disorder, anxiety, Parkinson, Alzheimer, and various autoimmune diseases and so many other conditions that affect human quality of life are rising at an alarming rate. This increase in conditions that reduce both quality and life expectancy is not normal. It may be common in our society, but it is definitely not normal. What is most frightening is that these conditions have become so common that many don't even realize they are dealing with disorders, disease, symptoms, and entirely new conditions. Disorders that a few generations ago were extremely rare or practically non-existent. And we cannot blame the doctors. Current medical training focuses only on symptoms and medications. It works almost like a connect the dots games. If the patient has these symptoms, prescribe this drug. If they have that other symptom, then prescribe this one, and that's it. The whole complexity of the human body in most cases is reduced to this. Few healthcare professionals learn about the history and origins of various diseases, and in my view, this is intentional. Is it really in the interest of those who dictate what should be taught in medical schools for doctors or other health professionals to have a broader perspective? A perspective that goes beyond symptoms, a perspective that doesn't end inside the box of a prescription drug. But that is not the subject for now. The fact is that the way medical education is conducted today, the rising prevalence and causes of various comorbidities that affect a human being simply go unnoticed, as if they were irrelevant, as if they were normal. The truth is, they are not. It is impossible to ignore one reality. We live in the 20th century, with a life completely different from that of our ancestors. And these new disease, symptoms, and conditions we face today are also different from those of our ancestors. Symptoms and disease that were also aware are now common. Not to mention the new disease and symptoms that have seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Symptoms, disease, conditions, and syndromes that didn't even exist 20 years ago are now prevalent and already have a name, a protocol, and of course, a specific medication. Just look at the evolution of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. In its first edition, published in 1952, there are just over 100 diagnoses. Today, in the 5th edition, the DSM-5, published in 2022, there are more than 300 diagnoses in the field of mental health alone. In other words, in just 70 years, nearly 200 new diagnoses have appeared exclusively related to mental health. And notice, I am referring only to mental disorders, only to what is described in a single manual. That doesn't even include the countless other diseases and symptoms that affect different parts of the body, such as the digestive, immune, metabolic, cardiovascular, and hormonal systems, for example. If we consider all of that together, the number of new conditions that emerged in recent decades would be even more alarming. But even focusing only on the field of mental health, it is common to ask how and why so many new diseases could have emerged in such a short time. But regardless of the answer, one thing is certain. These new disease, symptoms, and conditions are a direct reflect of the way we are living. Allergies, autoimmune disease, obesity, digestive disorders, and the most diverse mental health conditions such as autism, anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorders, and any other symptoms, disease, or condition that might come to your mind right now at first glance, and with a superficial view may seem like a group of isolated, unrelated conditions, each one with different symptoms, causes, and treatments. But if you take a deeper look, if you really connect the dots, a clear pattern begins to emerge. And this pattern is called the gut. It doesn't matter which area of the human body is being evaluated, no matter how distinct, how seemingly unrelated it may be. From obesity to allergies, from depression to Alzheimer, from autoimmune disease to autism, it doesn't matter. In all of them, the gut shows some degree of dysfunctions. And that dysfunctions end up reflecting throughout the entire body. I will repeat this to make it crystal clear. The gut, regardless of the symptom, disease, or condition, will be altered. And an altered gut will affect the body as a whole. And even knowing that this relationship exists, it is still common for people's health problems to be justified solely by genetics. And yes, genetics does contribute to many disease, symptoms, and conditions. But blaming only your genetics for modern disease is a huge mistake, because the genetics of a population does not change that quickly. We cannot say that in less than a century, an epidemic of defective genes suddenly appeared to explain the rise of obesity, autism, asthma, and so many other conditions. Evolution does not happen that fast. In addition, for a genetic mutation is spread throughout a population, that mutation must provide some adaptive advantage, or at the very least, not be be a harmful genetic alteration, and none of these modern conditions or disease represent any kind of benefit. Let's be honest, it is exactly the opposite. So, if genetics haven't changed, the inevitable question is, has the environment we live is changing? And the answer is yes. Just like a person's health depends not only on the genetics they carry, but also on nutrition, sleep, physical activity, and lifestyle, health and disease risks also depend on external factors. But this is where things get complicated, because with so many changes in the last 100 years, pointing to exactly what is causing this new pattern of disease requires careful analysis, and any generalization would be misleading. However, there is one factor that cannot be ignored: the modern dietary pattern. A pattern based on refined carbohydrates and low-quality fats. Undeniable, the way we eat today plays a major role in this process. From an evolutionary perspective, human beings never, I will repeat, never had an abundance of carbohydrates available in nature. We evolved with extremely limited access to foods rich in sugar and starch. The nutritional pattern that shaped our genetics over millions and millions of years was always low in carbohydrates and high in quality fats. And this was true across all biomes on the planet. It doesn't matter if you are talking about the Atlantic forest, the frozen plains of Europe, arid desert, or the icy poles of the globe. It doesn't matter. The primitive natural environment where we lived for millennia never offered an abundance of carbohydrates. And it was this reality of carbohydrate scarcity in our diet that shaped how our body functioned over millions and millions of years. And today, what we have is exactly the opposite. Concentrate carbohydrates in practically every meal. But talking about this is still a sensitive topic, because even today, it is still thought, almost as if it were absolute true, that the foundation of the human diet should be rich in carbohydrates. Even though, from an evolutionary perspective, that makes no sense at all. And we will go further. It doesn't make sense either in theory or in practice. Because, coincidence or not, it was precisely after the introduction of highly questionable dietary guidelines that we begin to see the rise of a silent epidemic of chronic autoimmune, neurological, and psychiatric disease. So much so that the JAMA itself, that is the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the most respected scientific publications in the world, showed in 2016 that the sugar industry influenced the research and official recommendations for decades to promote carbohydrate consumption as something healthy and absolutely necessary for the human body. But I won't go deeper into that discussion here. It isn't the right setting for it. What matters is this. Modern disease that, at first glance, may seem unrelated will always, in some way, be connected to the gut and the dietary habits. In some diseases, such as irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease, this connection is obvious since the word bowel is literally in the name of the disease. But even in cases where this relationship is not as clear, the gut is still involved. Many people with depression suffer from gut problems. Autoimmune disease go hand in hand with the gut. And autistic individuals, for example, often experience chronic diarrhea or severe constipation. And it is not uncommon to observe. In people on the autism spectrum, a worsening behavior symptoms such as increased stereotypies, irritability, or sensory meltdowns are together with a worsening gastrointestinal health. This aggravation of gut problems show up through simple signs, which often go unnoticed, like stronger stool odor, more intense smelling gas, and increased frequency or abdominal discomfort. All of these are clear indicators that the gut is not healthy. Please, remember this. Doesn't matter the disease, it doesn't matter the name, it doesn't matter the symptom, condition, or syndrome. It doesn't matter. The gut will always be involved to some degree. And one of the most effective ways to begin improving gut health, even today, is through diet. Significantly reducing refined carbohydrate consumption and gradually replacing it with high-quality proteins and fats, moving toward a dietary pattern closer to the one of our species followed and adapted to over thousands and thousands of years of evolution, is already an excellent start.